So, we speak about meditation as a journey, and it's the best image, really, I think, to describe the experience that we begin when we start to meditate and that we deepen as we persevere on the path and come back to it when we give up. When we begin to feel and see how it is a journey, then I think we can say we have begun. And all that's necessary is to be on the way. We don't know how long the journey is going to take, and we can only say that we are on the way. We haven't ever reached the end goal. There's a passage in St. Paul where he speaks about himself leaving behind the past and always stretching forward to the next, to the future. Epictasis is the Greek word that suggests this constant stretching forward. And it's picked up in the mystical tradition by many writers, like Gregory of Nyssa, for example, who says that to seek God is to find God. Jesus said, if you seek, you will find. But to seek God, but to find God is to begin a new stage of seeking. So we never can say we've done it, we've arrived, we've mastered it. It's always a journey. What St. Paul also calls in the letter to the Romans, the gospel is a way of salvation that begins in faith and ends in faith. So it's open-ended at both ends. Faith is our commitment to the journey. When we speak about a faithful marriage, a faithful friendship, a faithful commitment, that's what we mean. We're with it, we're staying with it. So faith is our capacity for personal commitment, for the transcendence of our ego that wants to get impatient or wants to give up. And faith says, no, just hang in there. It will look better this evening. And don't give up. Or if you've given up, or if you've been unfaithful, that's not the end of the road either, because you can always learn from your infidelity. That can be healed. It's difficult to heal an infidelity, as many of you may know, but it's possible. It can be done in most cases. It can be done. It has to be done, actually. So the journey symbol of meditation is a very useful one, because it will help us to understand our own experience. When people first start to meditate, they often get discouraged early on because they feel they're not getting anywhere and they don't even know where they should be going. It's a bit like St. Thomas saying, show us the Father. And we get discouraged because we're trying to judge the experience that meditation is leading us into, this experience of silence, where we leave words, images, and thoughts behind, this experience of poverty of spirit, where we let go of our impatience, of our desire, of our hopes. We let go of all of that, we go into that experience of silence and poverty of spirit, and the mind, our ordinary mind, at the beginning, it just can't work this out. It doesn't make any sense. To our ordinary mind, that deals in simple yes and no's, black and white, good and bad, pleasant and unpleasant, that ordinary mind is really challenged. We have to go to a deeper level of mind, a deeper level of consciousness that we call the heart. Now, many people give up meditation simply because, or don't go deeper into meditation. They often remain just on the surface level of getting a nice feeling of relaxation, but they don't really go to the deeper level because they are unfamiliar with this terrain, this part of the country. So we have to see ourselves as explorers. And this is an inner journey, an inner pilgrimage. And we're not the first people to undertake this human journey to depth. I spoke at the beginning of the retreat about the depth dimension. We're not the first people who've felt a hunger for this depth dimension. We're not the first people who have discovered that meditation can take us into this depth dimension. But the way we do it is unique. This is the mystery. It is going to be utterly unique and personal for each of us. And yet, when you meet somebody on this journey that you are on, you recognize each other. And it may be subtle signals that we send, or just the way we approach things. But you have a sense that here is somebody going in the same direction. And that is why meditation creates community. It's a miracle, really, that by moving into this solitude of meditation, where you meet yourself in your uniqueness, in that solitude of meditation, you actually discover your relationship and connectedness with everyone. Now, when you meet someone who is also aware of that, then there is a mutual recognition. It's a little awakening of a wonderful kind. But that recognition isn't always reciprocal. In other words, you can feel connected to people who don't feel connected to you. So, for example, you could be with somebody who is projected very negatively onto you, or rightly or wrongly is angry with you, disappointed with you, negative towards you in some way, or doesn't even notice you, and yet you can feel connected. You know you are connected, but it isn't reciprocal yet. Well, it may never be. But in those instances where there is a reciprocity, in other words, are you going in the same direction as me? So we know that we're moving together. We may only be traveling this bit of the road together for a short time, but we know we are connected and we know it mutually. That is tremendously reinforcing. It's what the New Testament calls koinonia, or communion. It gives us the word community. And it is the basis of the church. You might not always seem obvious that is the meaning of the church, but that is the essence of church, is this sense, mutual recognition of connection between people on the journey. Even if it's for a short meeting, the exchange of recognition is strengthening and delightful and part of the journey itself. So let's just look a little bit about at this journey and the stages of it, and some of the things that might get in the way of the journey and prevent us from completing it as smoothly as we could. I mean, it's a journey we have to make. You can't take a pill, and there's no DVD that's been made that you could just watch the DVD and then you've done the journey. So this is actually like digging the hole and putting the seed in the ground. We have to do the work ourselves. But we can We can't speed it up, we can't speed up the journey, but we can certainly reduce the waste of time, the wastage of time that often saddens our lives and the way we reflect on our history when we sense that we could have learnt this if we'd been a bit more awake or a bit more courageous or a bit more present. We could have learnt this 20 years ago. But to learn it at all is a wonderful thing, so you don't have to feel bad about the mistakes we make. The mistakes are rolled over into the journey itself, forgiveness. Anyway, one of the first things we discover, of course, as we start the journey is distraction. We learn that meditation is about the work of attention, that attention is transformative. Attention is the work of silence. In our journey, in our path, in our tradition, we take the mantra as the work of attention. We don't say this is the only way to heaven, but it is a good way to heaven. And if you want to follow this way, at least, well, just follow it. You know, if you are at the bus station and you ask somebody what's the way to Auckland, and they say that bus over there, and you get on the bus and it's going to Auckland, you don't keep jumping off the bus and trying another bus, or going back to the bus station and trying another one. So the wisdom of all the great mystical traditions boils down to staying on the path of perseverance. So, if this is the way you've been led, and the way that makes sense to you, and the way that you can feel is teaching you, then stick with it. And you learn that the mantra is the work of attention. When the mind wanders and thinking about this or that, and there will be many kinds of distraction, then you bring your attention back to the mantra. And after a while, when you realize that the state of distraction does not invalidate the meditation. So if you sat there and had a totally, muddled, distracted meditation, and at the end of the meditation you say, well, that was a waste of time. I could have just been having a cup of tea, or read a book. That thought is itself a distraction. You have to put that aside, because whatever the meditation period may seem like to you, however you may evaluate it, and basically how your ego evaluates it, you are still on the journey. You have taken a step on the journey. Now that may not be obvious immediately, but it will become increasingly obvious to you, and it will become second nature to you that you do your meditation, and if it's peaceful and blissful and you remember to turn your phone off, then you're happy with that. You accept that. And if it was distracted and anxious because you're going through a difficult or turbulent period or a lot of anxiety or something, then you accept that as well. But you were there. You took the step. So that becomes, it's like a doctor, talking to some doctors recently, introducing meditation to them, and I was listening, and he said, when I first started to meditate, he said the big problem was doing the meditation, just doing it. He said I believed in it, but it was really, very hard to do. He said now the difficult thing is not to do it. And that's a natural, you come to that. How long it will take you will depend upon your practice and your personality and so on. But there's a moment where you sense, this is now part of my life. And thank God for it. What a wonderful gift it is. Where did this gift come from? And how can I share this gift with others? Those are other steps on the journey. I was once responding to some questions at a retreat, and the man who was asking this question, he was very negative about the discipline of meditation. He said, "Oh, you keep on saying about meditating twice a day, and it's okay for you, but I'm living in the real world, and it's so difficult to do, and I get nothing out of it." And so I said, "Well, what actually is your practice?" And he said, "Well, I don't do it actually." So I said, "Well, can I suggest that you do it for 1 minute a year, but in the same place at the same time, and do that, and you will then, after 20 years, you will have a regular practice. It's going to take you a long time to do the journey, but at least you started." So we've got to just start and not look back. Put your hand on the plow, Jesus said, and don't look back. So that's the attitude we need to develop, and we give that attitude to each other, I think, and the tradition encourages us to take it. So the first thing we discover is our distraction. And we may have very mundane distractions, very operational distractions. I forgot to get that light switch fixed. Or I mustn't forget to go to the shop on the way back. These are problems, day-to-day problems that can be solved in a day. They're not there tomorrow. But then there's another level of distraction, bigger problems, which are carried by anxiety. Sometimes we don't even know what we're anxious about. We just feel anxiety or dread or fear or grief, and we can't even put our finger quite on it. As just this feeling of sadness or dread, very common. And so they may present themselves sometimes with particular situations or images or concerns or relationships or problems in your life. It could be health problems, it could be relationship problems. And they touch in to this stratum of grief or fear. So those are another source of distractions. And then there are problems, distractions that arise from places of deep repression, memories, feelings, experiences, sometimes even beyond our conscious memory. We wouldn't be able to remember them because they were so old. But they're there as forces, as presences in us that can present themselves and be distractions. And then there's a fourth level, really, which is where we just are distracted by our ego itself. Just the basic ego sense of looking at ourselves, the sense of separateness, the sense of being, as it were, in my own bubble and looking at the world through the walls of this bubble of the ego. I wish I could get out of this bubble and just be in the real world and meet people and be with things and enjoy life without this bubble. So the distractions will come all from different places with different kind of, they will carry different charges and different levels of interference with our attention, and they're all mixed up together sometimes. So that's how we start. Our minds are very unclear and very agitated. And your first reaction to that may be a sense of failure. And people often give up meditation because they feel they're not good at it. It's amazing how many times you hear that. Yes, I meditate, but I'm not very good at it, or I'm very bad at it. Well, welcome to the club. It's like people who say, group leaders who say, I have a group. Well, it's not really a group. We've been meeting for 15 years, but it's not really a group, and it's very small anyway. You know, why not just celebrate the fact that it has been so faithful all these years, and whether it's 2 people or 20 people doesn't matter. It's something of a miracle that it exists, and it is a place of friendship and support. So we have to learn to accept failure, and perhaps the most challenging thing for us is to work with that feeling of failure, certainly at the beginning. We have all been infected with this virus of perfectionism. We want everything perfect. We want intellectual answers. We want to be able to measure things. We want proof, certainty. We want predictability. And all of this is directed towards the great God of success. This has to be a successful company, it has to be a successful job, it has to be a successful marriage, it has to be a successful responsibility that I'm doing. So we've all been infected with this perfectionism. It has a religious side. The doctrine of original sin, and the way it was, is quite a wonderful doctrine if you think about it, but the way it's been presented to us from childhood, at least for some of us, has started us off on the wrong course, and there is still in some of the language and the thinking and the implicit in Christian language and Christian worship, this idea that we are failures, that our sinfulness is a failure that deserves to be punished because it means we didn't succeed in pleasing God, this parental figure whose approval we have to win. So I was talking about this morning. So this is one of the reasons why, in dealing with that feeling of failure and just laying it aside, not being controlled by it, not being managed by this feeling of failure, you are in fact doing a very deep work. You are in fact allowing the Spirit, through your faith has healed you, remember? We are healed by faith. So we are allowing the Spirit to get in and heal us. There's that beautiful line from the Sufi poet Rumi: "The wound is the place where the light enters you." The wound is the place where the light enters you. Leonard Cohen builds on that in one of his songs. Ring the bell that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And that first line ring the bell that still can ring. So there'll be a crack in the bell, but that's the only bell you've got. Just ring that bell. And through the crack, through the imperfection, I think it's some North American tribes that when they weave a carpet, I forget where this is, I think it's in North American Indian tribes, where they weave a carpet and they will deliberately put in a fault in it to make it real. And it's a beautiful idea, actually, the integration. Our idea of perfection is very much conditioned by the Greek idea of perfection, which is that in this life we are imperfect. We perfect, nothing, even the most beautiful person or the most beautiful work or anything doesn't stay perfect for very long. And perfection is only found in this, in the perfect forms, in the highest abstraction, in the highest level of reality beyond this terrestrial world. That's the Greek idea of perfection. But the biblical idea of perfection is that only God is perfect. And the perfection that is God absorbs our imperfection, doesn't run away from it, doesn't punish it, doesn't reject it. It embraces it. This ultimately becomes the idea of the incarnation, of course. God became human. And there's that great line from Oscar Wilde, "How else but through a broken heart may Lord Christ enter in the Ballad of Reading Gaol." So we have to be on our guard against this virus of perfectionism, and it's not difficult to recognize and notice. And once you've noticed it, and the feeling that, oh, there's no point in me meditating, I'm such a bad meditator, that thought is a thought. You have to let that thought go as well. If you can get hold of that very simple idea, it's a little subtle, but it's quite simple. You let go of the thought, I'm no good at meditation, and you've taken another step on the journey. Okay. We also have to learn what the wisdom of the great traditions tell us. We have to do our work as well as we can, put our whole self into it, whatever it is, whatever kind of work we're doing, we should do wholeheartedly. What's the point in doing something half-heartedly, miserably, complainingly? Just do it or don't do it. If you're going to do it wholeheartedly as best you can, put your whole self into it, and then take your whole self out of it. And what's left is your true self. And whatever work you do from your true self is good work. However small a gesture it may be. And the saying of the mantra is a work. You put your whole self into it because you're giving it your attention, you take your whole self out of it, you're detached from the fruits of your labor. Okay? You're not doing it because I'm going to get this or that out of it. I'm just doing it for its own sake, without demands. Father John Main says this, without demands or expectations. You have to learn to say the mantra and to be content to say it. And then live out the consequences of saying it. So when we start this journey, we say the mantra, we are content to say the mantra, and we live out the consequences of saying it. So in this process, and that may take a couple of years, even before that attitude, that approach, that understanding of meditation begins to be obvious to you. Again, it doesn't, it varies, doesn't it, from person to person. But you will probably not understand that at first, or you will very vaguely understand it. But then, as the great teachers of the tradition tell us, experience is the teacher. Magistra experientia. So you have to put yourself in the way of the experience, allow the experience to happen by doing the practice as best you can, and then that experience will teach you everything you need to know about it. If we're obsessed with perfection, with success, that mindset is going to change. If our distractions seem overwhelming, those distractions will gradually move into the background, and there will be moments where we're free from the distractions. If we think or feel that our wounds are impediments to this journey, we will discover that actually those wounds are the places where grace enters us. We have this treasure, St. Paul says, in earthen vessels, so that the all-surpassing power is from God, not from us. So we begin the journey. We begin to understand what the cloud of unknowing meant when he said, sinners make the best contemplatives. Sometimes I think it's contemplatives make the best sinners. So you have to watch out for that. But certainly, if you can accept your imperfection, that we're sinners, and still get on the bus and stay on the bus, then you will be a contemplative. We make this journey by taking small steps. I was once walking in the Himalayas, and the oxygen, the air was very thin. I'd done a bit of preparation for it, but the guide who was with us was this old man who was just wearing plimsolls and leaping like a mountain goat, and we were struggling to keep up, and the higher we got, and when I came to a steep part of the mountain, I said, oh, God, I've got to get through this. So my instinct was to get it over with quickly. So I rushed, and of course I wasn't halfway up before I was panting and had to stop. And then the guide would come down and say, just take small steps. And he would only give us, maybe 30 seconds to rest. But we were in his hands, and we trusted him, and he was a good teacher. So in the same way, we take small steps on this journey, and you can cover an amazing distance, and great height, and scale great heights if you just adjust your pace and take small steps. We have to think of the power of meditation as the power of the small. The ego likes big things, like success. The Hiroshima bomb that killed 130,000 people instantaneously, where at the core of the bomb was 1 gram of matter, whatever it was. 1 gram created all this devastation. So our meditation is a very small thing. Saying the mantra is a very small thing, but it produces a great deal of energy, positive energy. creative, recreative energy. The meditation group may be a very small little group, but it has great power. A community may be small and imperfect and fragile, and yet can produce great grace for the world. And we often think, when we're obsessed by this idea of failure, that it's not worth it. The cloud of unknowing gives us some encouragement here. This is the quote I was looking for yesterday. He says, "Your fellow human beings are marvelously enriched by this work of yours, even if you may not fully understand how." Well, that takes you into the depth dimension. "The souls of purgatory are touched, for their suffering is eased by the effects of this work." So another way I might put that is that this work is burning up negative karma in the universe. And of course, your own spirit is purified and strengthened by this contemplative work more than by all the others put together. Quite a big claim. And as I said yesterday, he says in chapter 54, you will become more attractive in body and personality, he says. So we make this journey not by a sense of self-aggrandizement or the inflated ego looking for success, but through the power of the small, through this poverty of spirit which happens as we let go, as we become less possessive, less controlling, less self-centered, and by the purity of heart which results from this poverty of spirit. We learn to say the mantra from the beginning to the end of the meditation, morning and evening, and we allow these small steps to help us to cover the journey. There will be times, of course, periods, on a cyclical basis even, where you will be discouraged and probably give up. And if you take the long-term view and you start again, humbly, you will then recognize that this is part of a pattern. And you'll know that this pattern is something you can live with. This feeling of discouragement is what the desert teachers called acedia. It's something A-C-E-D-I-A. It's something that everybody feels. You feel it sometime after you've made any commitment, any serious commitment. It isn't working out as you had imagined, it's more difficult, you're not, it's getting hard, it's getting boring, it's lost its glamour or its glitter. Whatever the reason, you get discouraged. The hunger for novelty, fantasy. So we have to recognize those periods of acedia. We have to get through them. Desert teachers used to say, you talk it through. Find someone, a friend, a teacher, to talk it through with. Your meditation group is a friend and a teacher. And then you get through it. And as you get through it, you grow. And so they said, when you got out of acedia, you find yourself in what they called apatheia, which means a health, they called it the health of soul, the health of the soul. This is where we're really experiencing our personal harmony, our balance, our centeredness, our joyfulness, our creativity, things are flowing in the right way. And we can cope with anything. And then they would say the child of apatheia is what? Agape. Agape. Love. Boundless, unconditional, all-embracing, all-inclusive love. So the achadia comes, the discouragement, the feeling of failure, get through it, get some, you go through it with the help of your friends, taste the health of soul, and allow agape to flow through you and from you. I just want to end with another poem by George Herbert. I read Love this morning, and this one is called The Flower. And I always remember the first time I came across this poem. I was studying English at Oxford, and a rather brilliant friend of mine asked me if I knew this poem, The Flower, and I said no. And he made me feel completely inadequate, He said, it's the greatest poem in the English language. And I think he's right, actually. Well, so it's a little long, but let's read it. It's basically about change. He's sometimes called, he's a very English poet. He was a 17th century poet who came from a very privileged aristocratic kind of background, and obviously had his own struggles, ended up becoming a sort of a country parson off the big circuit, and living a deep inner journey and struggle. Didn't publish any of his English poems during his lifetime, but probably circulated them among his friends. And if you've ever lived in an English climate, which I think you have here to some extent, but in an English climate, then you'll recognize why he's called the poet of the inner weather. And here he's describing the inner weather of the journey and the changes of mood, feeling that we go through. And anyway, I'll read some of it. I may read it. And he begins with this, one of his favorite words is clean. How fresh, O Lord, how sweet and clean are thy returns. I mean, so when the Lord comes back. How fresh, O Lord, how sweet and clean are thy returns, even as the flowers in spring, to which, besides their own demesne, the late past frosts tributes of pleasure bring. Grief melts away like snow in May, as if there were no such cold thing. Who would have thought my shriveled heart could have recovered greenness? It was gone quite underground, as flowers depart to see their mother root when they have blown, where they together, all the hard weather, dead to the world, keep house unknown. These are thy wonders, Lord of power, killing and quickening, bringing down to hell and up to heaven in an hour, making a chiming of a passing bell. We say amiss this or that is, thy word is all, if we could spell. Oh, that I once past changing were, fast in thy paradise, where no flower can wither. Many a spring I shoot up fair, offering at heaven, growing and groaning thither. Nor doth my flower want a spring shower, my sins and I joining together. But while I grow in a straight line, still upwards bent, as if heaven were mine own, thy anger comes, and I decline. What frost to that? What pole is not the zone where all things burn, when thou dost turn, and the least frown of thine is shown? And now in age I bud again. After so many deaths, I live and write. I once more smell the dew and rain, and relish versing. O my only light, it cannot be that I am he on whom thy tempests fell all night. These are thy wonders, Lord of love, to make us see we are but flowers that glide, which, when we once can find and prove, thou hast a garden for us where to bide. Who would be more, swelling through store, forfeit their paradise by their pride. So as it's the greatest poem in the English language, you might need to read it again. But it's about the sometimes very rapid changes of mental states and how vulnerable we are to shifting moods and feelings.
So what is that book we're holding?
Oh, it's a biography of George Herbert by John Drury, Music at Midnight. His English poems are quite not. It's quite a small book. So he and then this wonderful verse really. And now in age I bud again. After so many deaths I live and write. I mean, writing for him was his work, his life. He loved it. Now, after so many deaths, I live and write. I once more smell the dew and rain. So there, he's writing haikus again, just smelling the dew and rain, and relish versing, enjoying what I can do. It's impossible to imagine that I'm the person who was feeling so dark and despairing yesterday. And then this final verse which says, we have to accept this condition of changeability. He says, these are thy wonders, Lord of love, to make us see that we are impermanent. We are flowers, we are but flowers that glide. And if we can once find and prove that, if we can accept that, then we find our place in the garden where we are rooted. So we don't find this rootedness in our imagination, in fantasy. We find it by accepting the fact that we are imperfect, that we are changeable, and we will always be changeable. But by accepting that, we find our center, where we bide, where we stay. And if we don't accept that, if we try to live off some imaginary sense of perfection, swelling through store, getting bigger and bigger, then we will lose paradise by our pride, by the ego. The ego will keep us out of this garden. So it's a very, very beautiful poem, I think, about the journey of life, but it's one that we can certainly apply, I think, to the journey of meditation, our spiritual path as well.